people naturally, maybe not everybody, but there's certainly a percentage of the population that naturally would rather say no to a salesperson than yes.
Sure.
So let's just get the sale closed by getting them to say no. And the closing question that we teach, as a matter of fact, I even work it into Streetwise, is the question after you've finished everything, say, well, let me ask you a question, and please feel completely comfortable telling me no. Do you see any reason we shouldn't move forward with this? Well, no. And so when they say no, they're actually taking that next step.
Welcome to the podcast dedicated to real estate, insurance, and everything in between. Join us as we take you along our own brokerage building journeys with additional wisdom from our network of business experts. Welcome to Bricks and Risk. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Bricks and Risk. I'm Tim Garrity.
And I'm Sean Mooney.
And today, Sean, we have an awesome guest on. We have Jeff West, author, award-winning author, best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. How you doing today, Jeff?
Doing quite well, my friends. Thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Oh,
pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. So, little background on Jeff. With over 30 years in sales leadership, and entrepreneurship experience, Jeff has coached and led sales teams in multiple industries. During his corporate career, he was among the top sales performers and leaders in the nation. And for over 20 of those years, Jeff was in the field of sales management with Fortune 500 insurance company Aflac. As an author, Jeff's books include The Unexpected Tour Guide, A Salesman, a Homeless Man, and an Incredible Adventure, which came out in 2014. Said the Lady with the Blue Hair, 7 Rules for Success in Direct Sales, wrapped in a Wonderful Lesson for Life, which came out in 2022. And his latest book, Streetwise to Saleswise, Become Objection-Proof and Beat the Sales Blues, came out in 2023. And he co-authored that book with the infamous Bob Burg from the Go Giver series, which that's an unbelievable background. Let me first say that, Jeff. That's really wonderful.
I've had a very blessed life in many ways.
Yes, so. Yeah, you totally have. So, and a few more quick things. So Jeff has won numerous awards for his books. He's been a guest on many different podcasts and sales leadership shows. And he is also a member of the Go Giver Success Alliance, which was created by Bob Burg. So one thing you always say you should never try to overcome objections. But if you don't, you may not be able to advance the sale. So talk a little bit about that and why objection handling is such an important part of business.
That's such a great question, Tim. The whole idea in traditional sales training has often been that you're going to get certain objections. And so you would train the salespeople, okay, if they say this, you say that. Yeah. They hit it this way, you hit it that way. And before you know it, it's like a ping pong match and nobody's really advancing anything. And when you do that, psychologically, what happens? We all make decisions with a combination of logic and emotions. I've got a branding called Fusion Points where I dive pretty deeply into that. But all it really amounts to is inside our brain, when we have an emotional response to anything, our brain immediately sends an electrical signal into our chest, into our stomach, and we have a somatic marker. We feel something different because of the emotion we're experiencing at the time. When it's a negative emotion, the feelings that somatic marker sets off are feelings that you just don't want to be around anymore. You want to push back from it. But when it's a positive emotional experience, it's the exact opposite. The somatic marker, it generates feelings inside of us that we truly enjoy. And so what I teach in Fusion Points is that it's that combination of positive emotional experience with the logic of what you're trying to get done at the time. It results in a comfortable decision for someone to move forward. But in the process of how most salespeople are trained to handle objections, they're trained to create what I call a collision point. Because the truth is, no one wants to be overcome by anything. You think about it, an objection basically is very similar. I tell everyone it's similar to a political opinion, and nobody wants their opinion overcome in any way, shape, or form these days.
Isn't that the truth?
And
yeah.
It is. And when you have a salesperson who gets an objection and then tries to overcome it, well, if you look at the root words for overcoming, it really comes back to conquering. If you go back far enough, and no one wants to be conquered.
Yeah.
They want their opinion to be respected, valued, even if you're not going to agree with it. That's not what they want. So the whole idea of overcoming objections is really a fallacy in how anyone should do the sales process. Instead, you need to learn how to work comfortably within that objection so that you and the prospect together find a solution that is perfect for them. And if it's not perfect, at least it's close enough that and the way you handle it makes them comfortable in moving forward in their decision process.
It kind of sounds like people's default when you talk about those psychological reactions.
Yeah, I love the psychological part of business.
It's like a dog collar with the shock, right? Is like their default position is like no, right?
Yeah.
Like so you propose this and they no, and sales is probably working around that. Like, can you talk about massaging that or kind of knowing that it's coming and kind of setting the table? Is that kind of like how you propose it with sales?
Yeah, Sean, that's a great way to look at it. In the sales process, I always say sometimes salespeople are just taught so many bad habits from the get-go.
Agreed.
And they get into the idea, well, let's have a sales presentation. Well, sales presentation itself, I don't care for the term because that gets the salesperson talking way more than they're listening.
Yeah.
And so I like the term sales conversation. But it's just like you just kind of alluded to there, Sean. If you're having a conversation with someone and you've been doing sales any amount of time, there are certain objections, that are kind of built into the business model of what you're doing.
Sure.
And so once you kind of get a handle on that, then you can actually prepare for that in the actual sales conversation itself. And if you can present that potential objection along with a solution. And what it amounts to when you do it in the actual conversation there, you do it during your discovery section, because the better your discovery is, the fewer their objections are going to be anyway. And so if you ask great questions during that discovery part, and then you take the time to take your standard objections that you're going to get in your field, and you present that in the mix along with the solution to it at that point, because it was coming during what you were having a conversation about, that issue being brought up with the solution is education. But if you wait until that sales conversation is toward the end and your prospect brings up that same issue, it's no longer education, it's an objection. Now, you can still deal comfortably with it. We teach a process in the book, Streetwise to Saleswise, that does a beautiful job of that. But you can do that. But at that point, there's a way that we teach you to do it, that instead of creating an issue where you're triggering all of their negative emotions that combine with logic, we're teaching you how to do it in such a way that they actually come out of it having a stronger bond with you, because you handled it more like a friend who's trying to help them find a solution to something that's important to them.
That's awesome. Yeah, one thing you just said there, Jeff, that really resonated with me, and I think this probably comes from your background or my background, or kind of similar in corporate America. I was in corporate America for like a little less than a decade with two very big companies, is you use the word listen. And one thing in corporate America that they taught me, more or less, the last company I worked for before I got into real estate was Pulte Homes. They were one of the top three largest residential home builders in the United States when I worked for them. And it was a wildly successful business. Amazing culture, training, everything. And they were very big on listening more and talking less. They taught their salespeople that. I was more in their mortgage side of things. And you being with Aflac and obviously being in like management at a corporation, which is what I was doing too, like you get all this amazing corporate training. So talk a little bit about when you were with Aflac and prior to what you're doing today, which is more or less, you're coaching, you're writing amazing books. Like, what did Aflac teach you about listening as far as objection handling?
Well, I think all corporate training can at times fall a little short in that arena. And although Aflac certainly did teach a sales process where you were asking questions and trying to get you to get the prospect to be able to vocalize their needs and verbalize it so that you could have a real conversation about them, it probably fell just a little bit short. And I think where I learned a lot of my focus about how to ask questions that got them going was in study that I did that was outside of my corporate structure.
Oh, okay.
You know, one of my very favorite books, I laugh about this because I've told the story so often. In January of 2000, I had a sales mentor who was a state manager with Aflac at the time that gave me 2 books. And he said, Jeff, I want you to read these books. And I said, his name was Frank. I said, Frank Davies, I'm a grown man. I'll decide whether I read that book or not. And I am going to read those books. And then there were 2 of them. One was Dr. John C. Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership.
Book.
Oh, everybody who's leading a team in any industry should devour that book. And the second book that he gave was a book that I'd never heard of, and I had never heard of the author. And it was some guy named Bob Burg, and it was called Endless Referrals. And it's so funny. I took those 2 books in January of 2000 and began to apply them in my own business model. Neither of the books were about insurance, but they had such great lessons. And I think it was Endless Referrals really where I learned how to do that. I learned how to ask the questions that were so focused on the need or the benefit to the person that I was visiting with and got them to talking about their issues. And what I learned, quite frankly, guys, is I learned that if I asked the right questions, the prospect would say what they needed to hear. I didn't have to be the one to say it. You know, I could have told them, well, you know, we can do this and this and this. It's going to help your employee benefit program. You're going to attract better workers. You're going to retain those workers. I could have said all of that. But if I ask the right questions and they say it, oh, it's so much more powerful because as a salesperson, what we all have to kind of realize is it's not necessarily our fault, but the general public doesn't look at the words coming out of a salesperson's mouth when they don't know, like, or trust that salesperson. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily think of it as being the gospel truth. But if you ask the right questions and they say it, oh, there is no doubt that it's true because it came out of their mouth. So I developed the questions, but I learned how to ask the questions that will get that person I'm having the conversation with to think through their issues and what the good solutions would be. And when I asked those questions and they said 2 or 3 things that I knew we could help with, then it was very easy for me to put a psychological context with it where the positive emotional response was because I was going to be able to help them do something that they're already telling me they want to do. Yeah. And then I had the logic to back it up. And so when I would ask those questions, I would say, well, you know, I have some really good news for you today, Tim. There's some things you just told me that you're trying to do that we can actually help you do. For example, you said you wanted a blue widget instead of a green widget. We've got the best blue widgets in the world. I mean, you get the idea.
Yeah.
But if I were to say it as a salesperson, it might be suspect. But if they say it, it is the gospel truth, no doubt.
That's a really good way to put it.
Jeff, I heard you talking recently about the psychological tangling of working with a client, and you had them land on a no to close the deal. You remember talking about that?
I've been on so many shows lately, guys. I might have to get you to get a little more specific.
I think it was like you were uncomfortable with them saying no to you, but the way that you did it was, if you're able to get them to agree to your terms by saying no, then it was really like you're doing it on your terms, but them telling you no.
Perfect, Sean. That's exactly right. And how I used to, and for decades of my life, I've taught people, especially newer salespeople, that seem to be possibly a little bit uncomfortable when it came time to ask for that order to get the paperwork done.
Yep.
I've taught everybody. You know, people naturally, maybe not everybody, but there's certainly a percentage of the population that naturally would rather say no to a salesperson than yes. So let's just get the sale closed by getting them to say no. And the closing question that we teach, as a matter of fact, I even work it into Streetwise, is the question after you've finished everything, say, well, let me ask you a question, and please feel completely comfortable telling me no. Do you see any reason we shouldn't move forward with this? Well, no. So when they say no, they're actually taking that next step.
Yeah.
So,
Saying
And that's
yes.
the whole psychological nature of people and knowing them and
Yeah.
the sales.
Letting your guard down, letting the customer be in control. I mean, at the end of the day, why are they even talking to you? They have a need. There's a need for that blue
Absolutely.
widget. And they're like, I know I need a blue widget, but I don't know Jeff. And Jeff's job is to sell me on Jeff because I can get blue widgets wherever I want. And that also brings me to my next one. I want to talk a little bit about framing, because I know you've talked about this before. So
Right.
What is framing in more of a business context, and like, why is it so important in business, but also could be important in your life, your married life, your parenting life, friendships?
sure. It's amazing, Tim, how often the same principles that we'll learn that will make us successful in one area of our life do exactly the same in our other areas of our life too. Basically, a frame is just how we see the world. Every experience that we've had up to the ones we're having right now kind of shapes how we see the world. And no one else sees the world exactly like we do. And sometimes that focus may be on what's going well, might be on what's going poorly. So that's just how we see the world. And the idea of reframing or setting that frame a little differently is so important in a sales conversation, especially when you get to the point that you're dealing with the objection process that may happen for you. Because you see, at the very core of sales at its very best, it's exactly what you said earlier. It's about finding a person that has a need and then being focused on them, being focused on how their world gets better once you're a part of, they're working with you and you're part of their existence. And so when you can do that, we're fortunate. We find a person with a need and a company with a solution, or it may be our solution if we're an entrepreneur. When we find that, we put the two together and we get paid for being a matchmaker. Well, in the process of your sales conversation, you have to kind of go into it, unless it's a referral from someone who already knows, likes, and trusts you, and you're borrowing their credibility with that individual you're visiting with. You have to kind of go in there thinking, okay, they may or may not have a very positive opinion of what sales is like or what salespeople are like. So from the very first moment you're in there, your goal is to change that frame slightly. And you do that by when you're getting to know them in the rapport section. You're going to do some of that then, because it's going to start that personal connection. When you have the actual discovery part where you're asking them questions and then you're listening intently to what they're saying, because you know that their needs are what really matter, not what you do. Nobody's going to buy from us because we have a quota or we have to pay our bills. They're going to buy from us because they need something that we can help them get. So, excuse me, as you ask those questions, you begin to shift their frame of what they think a salesperson is.
Yeah.
And then when you get to an actual objection, part of that process is after you've listened and you've asked the right questions about their objection, making sure you're getting down to the real issue. When you actually offer a solution, because of the way you've handled it up to that point with your empathy level and the right questions so that you can help them find a solution, and you're not telling them they're wrong in their objection by giving them the solution to it immediately. You're asking so you can make sure that you can find something that works well for them. You're reframing their perception as a salesperson, or what a salesperson is. And then when you offer your solution, you're just slightly shifting the frame so they can see it from a different perspective and see how a solution may work for them in that. And the reframe is completely, that's what makes that work.
In our office, we actually did a similar exercise with our service team. So our service team at times can get super busy. And, Mrs. Jones called about this bill or that bill. And we had one day where it was just over the top, right? My service team was complaining about said caller. And my response was, well, what if Mrs. Miller's sister just passed away?
Right.
And I got
really great advice, because people don't think about that.
I got to look back. Like, what do you mean? I said, well, let's just, to your point, reframe the conversation. If that conversation started with, my sister just passed away today, and I'm trying to deal with with these different bills and I'm a little behind. I said, your approach would be 180 degrees different in dealing with that person. So I said, why don't we have the approach of always taking when we're dealing with a service perspective, why don't we always, and I went to the extreme, I said, why don't we always have the vantage point of Mrs. Miller's sister just died? So that you start with empathy, with our clients, and it's going to frame the conversation so much better.
Yeah. Well, it is, Sean. That's some great coaching for your team. Fantastic. Because without that reframe like that, and without that level of empathy from the beginning, it's impossible for them to do their job. Because when you get down to it, a lot of companies will preach about their value proposition. And it'll be, this is what the transaction is. We're giving them this, they're giving us this in compensation, and that's the transaction. But then we do this and this and this on top of it. They kind of think of that as their value proposition. But that's really not what I consider a value proposition. A value proposition is totally about how your client's life is different because you're there. And it might be at claim time that you're helping them with a very difficult issue. I used to go work claims in person. Yeah. That was back before the days when the HIPAA rules would prohibit that. But I got involved in doing that. But when you do that, you can really focus on them. And the truth is, our value proposition isn't ours at all. It doesn't matter how great our company is. It doesn't matter how great our service or our product is. It doesn't even matter how great the sales or customer service person is, even though I'm sure they're absolutely wonderful. It's about how their life is different because we're there. So in essence, I always say it's their value from our proposition. And that's what a value proposition is. And the way you framed it with your team there, Sean, is they can't do that unless they are approaching it in such a way that whatever my potential client or whatever my client's going through, this is about them today. How can I make their world better?
Hey everyone, this is Tim, your favorite Bricks and Risk co-host. But don't tell Sean. I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I'll get right back to it in a moment. Our audience grows through word of mouth, so if you would please take a moment of your time and give us a review on the platform you're on, that would be fantastic. Please also help spread the B&R word by sharing your favorite episode with a friend. We greatly appreciate your time and trust. Now, back to the show.
The other claim to fame that I will give myself, and I do that rarely.
Well, why don't you give yourself another one, pal?
Yeah. My line that I always use with my team is, their perception is reality. Whatever that person's going through, whatever that person's dealing with, that's the truth. It doesn't matter if they're wrong.
Let me give Jeff some perspective here. So we've known each other for about 30 years. And Mr. Mooney over here.
I'm only 36.
Shit. Mr. Mooney over here is very much, his perspective sometimes can be my glass is half empty.
Always.
And I'm very much my glass is half full, which is why this podcast is going so well, if I don't say so myself, because we give two different perspectives, not only on business, but on life. And a lot of times when we talk about things and there isn't a guest on such as yourself, like we're really, like there's a lot of things we see similarities in, but again, perception is reality. And I wholeheartedly agree that you have to understand not everyone sees it the way you see it, especially when you get on the horn with them. Plus, sometimes when someone's upset, I've had people on my team say this too. They're just like, what did I do wrong? It's like, you might not have done anything wrong. What if they're having an awful day and you just happen to be on the front line of that? So it's not always about you and what you did wrong. They could be having a rough day, which then allows you to be empathetic. It allows you to understand not everyone looks at things the way you look at it, case in point. And also understanding that sometimes when someone is not being nice to you on the phone, through email, at a closing, whatever, being patient with them and saying, what can I do to help you out, will sometimes allow the problem to come out. I'm so sorry I said that to you. I'm having a bad day. My sister, my dog, or work, or, stress, or whatever it is. And I mean, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And if you've developed the right connection with that person, through either the sales process, if it's early on in the conversation, or if it's taking care of a customer after the fact. If you've developed that because your empathy is showing and you're asking questions and you're creating a connection with them, it's a positive connection for them, even if they're having a cruddy day. Then once that connection is there and they start feeling a little bit of that know, like, and trust relationship, they'll give you permission to shift their perspective. And you have earned that right at that point. And so you can actually make their day better. You can even make their situation better based on the product or service. But you do that because you've earned that right, because they're seeing how you are with them and they trust you more.
Such great advice.
Jeff, with all of the sales and the psychology that we've kind of gone over, I would have had to assume that you were either a psychology major or a business sales major in college. Is that right? Do I have that right?
You are so close. I've got a bachelor's in music ed and a master's in music composition.
I love it.
And those 2 degrees and a $10 bill will get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
So how did you go from music into the world of business or insurance and go down that track?
That's one of my favorite stories because I met one of my heroes when this happened. I'm just going to let you guys know that ahead of time. I was finishing up my master's degree. I needed to get a teaching job open somewhere in the area where my wife needed to finish her degree. There were no teaching jobs open at the time. And so I ended up getting a position in sales almost, I say by default, but now I look back now and I think it was divine providence. But I had a guy that ran a musical instrument company. I knew him as an acquaintance, but I didn't really know him as a person. It's a guy named Jack Amberson. I used him as one of my characters, actually, in my first book. He's an awesome guy. Right. But he had said, come out here, spend the week with me at spring break, ride with me, see if you want to do the job or not. And so for the entire week, guys, I lived at his house. I ate at his table. It gave me the exposure to know whether or not I wanted to do the job. And I did. And I ended up making 50% more than I would make teaching. And I just never went back to teaching. But the reason Jack Amberson is one of my heroes, every morning, guys, when we'd have breakfast and coffee, his kids at that time were first grade and younger. So he had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, Becky and Ted.
So you didn't get much sleep.
That's right. But every morning they'd run in and they'd jump up in his lap and he would give them a hug and a kiss. And he said, I love you so much. I am so glad God picked me to be your daddy. Now, guys, I had not been raised like that. Yeah. I hadn't been raised. I know my parents loved me. They worked hard. They put food on the table, but nobody ever said that. It wasn't, it was just a shock to my system. And guys, it not only changed my world. When I've got 2 daughters, it changed their world. I've got grandchildren. I've seen it passing down through there. I'll get people who've read The Unexpected Tour Guide. I had somebody from Australia send me something the other day, how much it meant. Yeah. And it's just so little things like that. I learned great sales lessons from the guy too, but that he made my world outside of sales be so much better.
Yeah. Oh, what a great story.
Awesome.
All right. So speaking of stories, let's talk about your books. And I want to focus on your latest book, Streetwise to Saleswise, Become Objection-Proof and Beat the Sales Blues. And you co-authored that with Bob Burg. But first, tell me a little bit, before you and Bob decided to do it together, you know, your first book was 2014, then 22, and you did one right after that with Bob. Like, what brought that out? Was it the 2 of you together? Did you have an idea?
Well, that's such a great question. Bob and I have actually been friends now for about 21, 22 years.
That's awesome.
It's so funny. I told you how I was recommending endless referrals to everybody, and that made so much difference. I got a call one day in my office in Plano, Texas, when I was a regional manager, and my administrator says, there's some guy on the phone named Bob Burg. And I said, oh, sure. I got one of my friends out here pulling my leg because I'm such a Bob Burg fan, you know. And I get on the phone, and you guys know Bob. He's got this positive vocal velocity. And he says, hi, Jeff, this is Bob Burg. And I said, guys, and I quote, sure it is, fella. And he said, excuse me?
Oh, that is great.
I told him the story and we became friends and we've been friends ever since. But Bob and Kathy Tajanel started a group called the Go Giver Success Alliance.
Yeah.
And I was one of the very first members of that. And the last book, said the lady with the blue hair, grew out of that book. My co-author on that book was in the Zoom and she's feeling very intimidated. Listen, guys, she's Avon's 5th highest earner in history.
Whoa.
She's earned millions of dollars with Avon.
Holy.
And her name is Lisa Wilbur. Great lady, great book. But she was in the chat and she had blue hair that day. She felt very self-conscious about it. So she got her turn on the screen and she said, I wanted to explain my blue hair. And so she told why she had it. And she said, but you know what? There's a side benefit. She's from New Hampshire. I'm going to do my best New Hampshire accent. She said, there's a side benefit here. She said, when you've got blue hair, I can be in the grocery store and I can say, that girl sure looks like she's got a skirt that's too short and too tight, said the lady with the blue hair. Stop being so judgmental.
No way.
I sent her a message and I said, that would be a great book title. You need to do that. And then later she and I actually did that. We took lessons she taught in her team.
Super cool.
And we turned it into Said the Lady with the Blue Hair. But with Bob and I think it was fourth quarter of 2022. Yeah. And Blue Hair had just come out. And it was an outgrowth of that group and it was doing well. So that was a good promotion for the group as well. But Bob sent me an email. We're always discussing sales issues and he sent me something, wanted to get my opinion before he put it out. And so I replied back to his email. But the very last sentence in his email was, by the way, save this because when we do our parable, this could be some good information. Yeah. And so I replied to his thing, and we'd never discussed doing a parable ever, even though we've been friends for so long.
Yeah.
And so when I replied to his email, I answered it and I said, oh, and by the way, if you're serious, oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing this.
Uh-huh.
And he had some material that it was some how-to material called Becoming Objection-Proof. And it's basically it's a step-by-step process that when you do that, when you get an objection, you not only do you stay calm and you get that prospect on your side because you're really trying to find out what their real issues are. And when you get through, you've built a bond in addition to helping them find a solution. But he had that information and he'd always wanted to do something with it, but he just didn't want to go through the process of turning it into another how-to book. And so we took that information, plus like I say, Bob and I have been friends forever. I've got a ton of sales training too. So this is a unique co-authorship as far as a sales parable goes, because oftentimes what you find is you've got one person's material and then you got the story spinner, which is me in this case, who writes the story. But in our case, it has so much of both of our training in it. I was the lead writer and I spun the tale, but it's got so much of Bob. And I was telling Bob, heck, even half the stuff that's me, it's because I learned it from you in Endless Referrals and I just put my spin on it. So it was just such a blessing. And he is, I tell you guys too, he literally is the same guy behind the scenes as you see in his public persona. I've never seen a man so focused on helping others and making a connection for others and getting paid in return. I mean, he does that. That's his thing. But he loves it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
How did you land on the parable style when you do the business books? It's a little bit of a different take, but very unique. And but I think it works well. But I'd be interested to hear how you kind of came to that style and how it works for you.
You know, for me, Sean, my first parable that I remember reading, I guess, was Og Mandino's Greatest Salesman in the World. And I thought that there was such a neat story. And I've found myself over the years, I can read and learn from the how-to books. I'm working on a book right now called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's a great book. And so I can get a lot out of that. But the ones that I enjoy the most are the business parables or the sales parables, whatever you want to call them. And it's because the story itself is something that grabs my attention in such a way that it catches my heart. And then I'm not only am I learning things, but I'm rooting for the character to learn things too.
Wow.
And it goes back to my concept of fusion points. It's about connecting a positive emotional response with the logic of what you're doing. And nothing in a how-to book does that so well. Even if you add stories, it'll do it some. But when you write a good sales parable or a business parable, it has the power to stay with people forever.
Yeah. That's so awesome. So I read The Go Giver, fantastic book. And Normally, I'm not a big reader. I always say on this, I'm like, Sean's the better man. You know, he reads more books. He's smarter.
Jeff, I'm kind of like you. I was
Better
the
human
English
being.
major in college. And when I graduated, they said, oh, great, you're going to wait tables or teach English. Which one are you going to do?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
Could be both. But yeah, I think what was interesting about The Go-Giver, because most of what I consume is it is very how-to. I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's giving sales advice. I watch a lot of business shows. I watch Shark Tank. I mean, you're watching these things. It's very businessy. But the one thing about The Go-Giver that I found interesting from someone who doesn't read like fiction, it kind of had like a fiction like sense to it, even though it's teaching you stuff because your focus is business. Right. And when you read that book, yeah, like you said, you kind of are like rooting for people. And then like in your mind, you're like, oh, this person's probably like this. And like the relationship with him and his wife. And you're like, they're probably like that. And like, it's just a different way to digest hard to consume information for a lot of people. Because a lot of people, you know, as much as I love the pragmatic approach to business, a lot of people can't consume that. They're just like, it's too boring. It's not exciting. I can't relate to it. And then when you read stuff more in a parable style, I agree. You really kind of get into the characters, you get into the story. It makes you want to keep reading more and more.
You know, and nothing is more music to my ears than when someone has read Streetwise to Saleswise or anything that I've written. And they tell me, even if I hadn't been in sales, even if I hadn't learned anything, I would have loved the story.
Yep.
And when we get that back, in this case, of course, we have the audio book on Audible, and it's Bob and I doing the narration on the audio book. And we've got in all the formats that you can get the book in. It is just, it's one of those things that, especially on the Audible, it's like you're sitting in your car in a live selling situation next to a mentor who's doing the job, and you're learning from them at that time. And it's just...
It kind of reminds me, as you talked earlier about, you know, having that initial job and, you know, working day to day, you know, with your boss early on and getting able to see and deal and look at those situations and, oh, how's he dealing with this or how's he doing with that? And kind of relating it to the book.
Yeah,
absolutely.
One question we ask, so we always ask our guests a few different business questions. You know, we like to have more of like standard questions to get a sense of what their take is and perception. So we asked, what's one of your tips to help our listeners, you know, find success in business? And you had said, be focused 100% on how your client's world becomes better by what you do, and then craft phrases that match that mindset. Focus on their value from your proposition. And I know we kind of touched upon that, but why was that the one that you decided to share when we asked that question?
Because in my opinion, that's the thing that I learned that catapulted my personal career. And I go back to endless referrals with Bob. But that book got me to understand better than anything else I had read before that it wasn't about me or my company or what we did. It was about how that person's life gets better that I'm talking to right now. How would their world be better if they took the step I'm asking them to take? And so what I began to do, not just in a sales conversation, but I would even do it with a conversation on the phone or face-to-face. If I was making my first initial contact with a company, I would focus on that, the administrative assistant that I was dealing with, how their world was going to get better with a relationship with me. You know, now in my particular case back then with Aflac, it was easy. It was an employee benefit program. Yep. I knew that if that person ever needed us, they were going to be really happy with what they got from Aflac because I was going to help them with a claim. I was going to do all of that. And so once I understood what Bob was teaching about being focused on the benefit to the other person, and I began to put that in my phraseology, a gatekeeper that I use the term gatekeeper into keyholder when we are in the book, but someone that you originally first think of as a salesperson as maybe a gatekeeper. Once I began to focus on the benefit of them, it allowed me to reframe that even in me so that I looked at them differently. Yeah. And I began to say phrases where that person would understand, you know, if they help me get in to see the right person, their world's going to get better if they have an accident or an illness or whatever. And I began to communicate that. And then all of a sudden, they were no longer gatekeepers. They were key holders. They were interested in helping me get to the right person.
Oh, that's so good. I love it. Another one that we asked too is that we ask for go-to quotes. And the one that you would put in our questions is, you can't make a six-figure income on minimum wage effort. Why don't you dive into that one a little bit? Because I thought that was great.
Thank you. It's actually one of my own. That's something I began to say to new insurance salespeople when I would talk to them. When my career took off with Aflac, I had been a district manager for 8 years. And I would make my quota one year, I'd miss it the next, just back and forth. I was not in danger of getting fired, but I was not going, I wasn't being a hero either until I read Endless Referrals. And then I began to apply what I learned there. 2 years later, I was a regional manager. 2 years after that, I was a state manager. And I was a state manager for 10 years until I retired from that career. And it was something that I began to say, even when I was talking to new agents in the sales schools as a district. And it was basically to get them to understand, we can teach you all the greatest things in the world. We absolutely, we have things that will work. We can teach you a process that's going to make that prospect comfortable moving forward. But you still got to get out there and go to work. You can't expect to make a six-figure income if you're prospecting or you're working 3 or 4 hours a week and then going home because you've got to go lick your wounds a little bit. Right. It just won't work that way. You've got to get out there and go to work. And one of my other quotes that goes along with that is, once you learn what to do, take action, because even God can't steer a parked car. You got to go move.
Yeah.
Well, sales in general, right? What you're willing to put in is what you're going to get out. It's just as simple as that. And if you're willing to bust it, try to put 110% effort in, it's going to pay dividends.
Yeah. Right.
I love it.
A lot of people that get into a sales position that, especially if it's something like insurance or real estate, where the investment to get in is minimal. And there are a lot of direct sales companies out there that there's practically no investment at all. It's really, it's something they've got to learn quickly, is to know, okay, sales is work. Not everything's going to go right. Yep. But if I get good at what I do and I'm really focused on bringing value to the person I'm talking to, all I have to do at that point is get out there and go to work and build relationships.
Fantastic. All right. Well, hey, we really appreciate your time today. Awesome. This has been unbelievable. I just walked away with a few initial things myself, but why don't you tell the audience, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, learn more about your books, and learn more about what you're doing in business?
Oh, thank you so much. The best place to go get the book is just go to Streetwise to Saleswise.com. You'll get information about the book. If someone wants to just download the first couple of chapters to make sure it's something they think they would like, they can do that there.
That's awesome.
And then there are links there to buy the book. You can go to Amazon. You can go to any book retailer and get the books. But if you go to there, especially if someone wants the hardcover book, we've got a special link there that goes direct to Ingram Spark, which is the largest book distributor basically out there. And they'll get the book much faster. It's a deal that Ingram Spark's worked out with us, and they'll get it there. So I recommend go there, even if you're going to get it on Audible or wherever. Start there and make sure it's what you want to do.
Yeah, and we'll get the links put up. We'll get the links put up as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. And my website's jeffcwest.com, and I have a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. It's just twice a week. That's just sales coaching, and anybody can have that. There's no charge. It's just something I do because I want to give it. And it's jeffcwest.com/Fusion Points Unleashed. Fusion Points Unleashed. So awesome. It's a nice little email series.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate your time today. And that'll wrap it up for this one, folks. So thank you for tuning in again to another episode of Bricks and Risk. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Bricks and Risk. Our goal is that you walk away with 1 or 2 valuable nuggets, and we greatly appreciate you sharing your time with us today. You can find all BNR episodes on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcast content. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.